Hi, everyone. My name is Shelley Reed. I am the manager of the Legal Services National Technology Assistance Project. We all call that LSNTAP for short. It's a whole lot easier to say. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a middle-aged white woman with shoulder-length brown hair and glasses. And today I am wearing a multicolored scarf. I'm really excited to introduce to you our guest speaker, Julian Post. He is an accredited Airtable provider, and he's a consultant that gives his expertise to many out in the field and has become well known for his videos and training sessions. And that's how I first came across his work. So welcome and take it on, Julian.
Thank you so much. So very excited to be here with you all today. And what I'm going to present today is a little bit of an intro on why you might use Airtable, what makes Airtable special from other tools. And then the rest of it is going to be more of an interactive, after I kind of give you the intro, we'll actually build something and hoping to make it a little bit interactive. So we can get some input from you on what you're interested in, and then stop and discuss things and answer questions along the way. So first thing, and I'm gonna see if I can get the chat showing for me, because I'm curious to know where you're coming from in terms of your experience with Airtable. So have you never used it before? Are you a beginner, intermediate? Be great to just, if everyone would be willing to drop that in the chat, that would be great to know. And then this is, maybe Shelley, you can tell me what to do here. But I think I need to, swap displays. Okay,
To
I'm
see
good.
the chat, you might be able to like minimize your screen. There's a little, if you're looking for the icon, there's a little icon probably above your PowerPoint slide.
I just figured it out.
Okay. Looks like we have a lot of beginners. We have a complete beginner, beginner-ish, beginner user, completely new, can do basics but want to learn more. Never used, but someone showed me their Airtable once 2 years ago. So that seems to be
Awesome. So we're
what we're
pretty
seeing.
new. That's great. And then my next question for you is, what would you like to use Airtable for? And you may have more or better answers for this at the end when I hopefully give you some ideas. But I'm curious, you are here you're here today for some reason. So I'm curious just what people were thinking that they might use it for. Okay, so I see publishing data publicly. Like a spreadsheet, teaching materials, automating internal processes, surveys. That's a great use for it. Automation, great. So we can talk about some automation later on because had a couple of those. So please feel free to keep putting these in. I'm going to move on to not make you all wait. But if you're still typing, please keep putting those in and we can revisit those later. So the first thing that I want to talk about today is, why would you use Airtable in comparison to all the different tools we have out there? And there are many ways to answer this question, but one that I find is a good way to look at it is how Airtable is unique specifically and how it handles relationships. So Airtable is technically a relational database, and everything on the internet uses relational databases. So any website that you're on, if you're on Google or Netflix or whatever, those are all using a relational database. But up until now, they have been these very technical softwares that are used mostly by software developers. There were not consumer facing relational databases. That's what Airtable is. And so a way to think about this is would suggest that you just take a minute and think of three people you know who have a dog.
And while they're thinking, Julian, I don't know if you realize, but your slides switch, so we are seeing the presenter view.
Oh
So
no.
it might help people to be able to see the slides better if you can switch that. Again, there should be a little arrow or a button at the top that allows you to switch where the screens are.
How's
Yeah,
this?
perfect. That's great.
Okay. Now you can just see that, and I took the meeting chat out of it. You can't see that now too, right? Okay, great.
No, we do not see the meeting chat.
Okay, awesome.
Well, not
Okay.
your meeting chat.
So so once you've thought of those three people, one thing that might be interesting is like, why did you think of those three people in particular? Maybe they're the people who you're closest to. They also might have other similarities, like maybe the first one you thought of, then you thought of the next person because they're both high school friends, or maybe they both live in the same place. And that's just a good example of how your brain is very good at mapping out relationships and remembering relationships. That's just one thing that we as humans are very good at. So congratulations, you're very impressive. Um, Now list every brunch you've ever been to with those people. That would probably be a lot harder. And that's why we use computers and specifically spreadsheets, because when it comes to tracking very specific details and large lists of details, we are generally not that good at doing that compared to a computer. Um, so, you might be able to, if that was important to you, which this probably, brunch is probably not something that you particularly need to track, but if it were, then you might put that into a spreadsheet. And so if we look at, this is a little rubric that I'm going to use to compare you versus a spreadsheet versus Airtable. We'll give you the check mark for being great at understanding relationships, but the X for not being as good at details. A spreadsheet, on the other hand, could hold all of the information that you need. It could have a list of dogs. It could have a list of those people or your friends, and it could have a list of brunches. But typically, it takes quite a lot of work to relate those different sheets of data to each other. If you do that, you might be very familiar with VLOOKUPs or index match or SUMIF. And those kind of formulas certainly work, but there is a much, much easier way to handle that. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So in terms of Excel, it gets a red X for relationships, but a check mark for the details. So moving on to Airtable, what is special about Airtable is that it very much looks like a spreadsheet and has many of the benefits of a spreadsheet, but it understands the relationships between the different kinds of data that you're tracking. And the reason why we have an interactive part after this is because I'm going to actually show you what that means. But I think it's helpful to understand that both on an abstract level and then on the specific level of how you actually would build that. So for Airtable, we'll give it the double check mark there. Any questions so far? All right, so I am going to exit the presentation, and then I'm going to share my Airtable database. All right, can you all see this?
We see an Airtable called Ellis, yes, Ellison Tap Base. green with yellow internet brighten.
Great. And one other thing that I'm going to show you here is, just going to pull this into. So when you first sign into Airtable, you're going to see a screen that looks like this. So this is kind of your home screen. And the way Airtable works is that you have workspaces that are kind of like folders. So if I look at home here, I've got lots of workspaces here, which I won't flash up because that has my my customers in it. But this Airtable 101 is a specific workspace. And then to create a new base, so base is database for short, but that's what these specific documents are called in Airtable. So to create a new one, I would hit this create button. I've already created a new one for our purposes here. So that's this one. But if I were to hit this create button, you would end up with just what we have here. I have not done anything to this Airtable base yet. So like a spreadsheet, we've got tabs. Normally, like in Excel, you might have those tabs at the bottom. These are at the top. And then we've got columns and we've got rows. So it looks a whole lot like a spreadsheet. But as you'll see, there are actually quite a lot of differences. So in our example that we were coming from that presentation and the example of friends, dogs, and brunches. And maybe we'll modify that slightly to instead of brunches, we'll say those are meetings. So maybe you're tracking meetings that you have with clients or potential customers. And so I am going to create 3 tables here, one for each of those. So let's say instead of friends, we'll call them clients. And then when you're adding a new table, you have lots of options to import data from somewhere else. I'm just going to click start from scratch, meaning that I'm just going to create my own new table. So this one's going to be meetings. And then I'll make a third one that is for dogs. And in Airtable, it's going to give you, whenever you create a new table, it gives you some example fields. We can just go ahead and delete those because I'm going to build all of these from scratch. So a few different things for clients that I might want to track would be a picture of them. And so when we create a new column in Airtable, it's actually called a field. And we can specify, or we have to specify the field type. So it could be just text. It could be an attachment. It could be a checkbox. It could be a drop down, which is called a single select. It could be a date. And this is one thing that immediately is different, but adds a lot more structure to your database and also allows you to do lots of cool things. Like, for example, since it recognizes dates, you can make different views. So you can view not just as a grid, but you could view as a calendar or view as a timeline. So for a picture of this client, we would use an attachment field. So we've created our picture field, and then let's do like a first name. That's going to be single line text. Last name. And an email. So we do have an email type. And then let's do a birthday also. So now that we've got these, I actually have some data that I can go ahead and paste in here. And even though this is a web-based platform, we can just copy and paste information from another Airtable base or from a spreadsheet. So that's very convenient. I just did Command C, Command V to do this. And you can see that it has mapped. And so I've got these different pictures of characters from Ted Lasso, and then all the information, their email address, and then their birthday. Any questions so far?
We have not had anything in chat, but I'm keeping an eye on it.
Okay. And the exciting thing is really going to be when we connect these different dots, but we need to do a little more setup first. And hopefully this, this is going to be a bit repetitive, but hopefully you're kind of getting a feel for how you might do this and how you might create something. So in our meetings, I am going to make a date for the meeting. And let's do a location. And that's going to be a drop down. So maybe I have, certain meeting locations that I use often. So I can enter those here. And maybe some notes, which could be a long text. And let's leave it at that. And then I guess we got to put our information in. So let me grab that. And so now that we've got, if we just paste in different options for this dropdown, then it remembers those options. And so we'll have those options in the future. Another way to add more options is to go into here, and then you can add options here, and you can even change the color of the option, which is kind of nice. So now I'm going to go into the dogs.
Julian,
Yes.
where are you copying and pasting those from? From a Excel spreadsheet or a Word document, or where are they coming from?
It's actually from another Airtable base.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
But so basically I've created this whole thing already, and I'm just recreating it for you. But you could also copy them from like an Excel spreadsheet or Google Sheets.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so for our dogs, we're going to give them a name here and then a type, dog type. That can be a single select. And that's it. So now I'll get my dogs here. And you may have noticed that I filled in this first field or this first column for the dogs, but I did not do that for meetings or for clients. And I guess I did it for clients, but I did not do it for meetings. The reason I didn't do it for meetings is you always want this first field, which is called in Airtable, it's called the primary field. You always want this to be a unique descriptor of this specific row. And the reason for that is that these are, and in Airtable, a row is called a record. And you might view this record in many different ways besides looking at it as a row. For example, I can expand this here. Now I can see it in more of a form type view. And then it kind of makes more sense that these are called fields, right? Because this is like when you're filling out a form, you would call them fields. And so the reason why I didn't fill this out is because to make it unique, you wouldn't use date because you could have multiple meetings on the same date. And you wouldn't use location because you're going to have multiple meetings at the same location. But you might not have meetings on the same date at the same location. That makes them more unique. If you might want to add another detail, but we'll just start with that. And so what I'm going to do is to concatenate or to add those two things together. And so I'm going to say, we're going to use actually a formula here that formats the date in a specific way. So we're going to format the date. And this date time format function takes a date, and then you tell it the way you want to format it. So in this case, in quotations, I'm going to say day, month, year. And then I'm going to put an ampersand and a space, or maybe a colon. And then we'll say location. And now we've got a more unique description of our record here. So now comes the fun part where we can actually relate these things to each other. And so we have these clients here, and what we want to track is when we have meetings with them. So if I go and create a new field here, I'm going to choose this option to link to another record. And when I do that, I can pick the other tables in the base. So if I click meetings here, I do want to allow linking to multiple records, because that means that I, might have multiple meetings with that same client. So go ahead and create that field. And then I'm just skipping the extra steps that you can do. Now that I've done that, if I click this little plus here, I have the full list of all the meetings that already exist. And so I could say, yes, for Danny Rojas, I did meet with him on 16/8/23. Or did I format that date weird? Yeah, it should be month day. All right, here we go. So so I've tracked that I had the date with him on, or the meeting with him on that date. And if I go now into meetings, I can see that for this meeting that I have him on here. And I could even add another person. So if I wanted to add Sam Opasanya to this as well, then I had a meeting with both of them on this date. And if I go back to the clients table, I can see that they both now are linked to this meeting. Any questions about that?
Not yet. I think I'm still reeling over the the formula for the name.
Okay. Yeah, it's all right. I went quickly through that because I really feel that the linked records are the most important thing to take away as a beginner. But we can certainly spend more time on formulas later, if that's of interest to people. So what I can do now when I have something like this, and let's say like I add a couple more meetings for Danny. So I've now had 3 meetings with him. And maybe one thing I want to know is, what was the latest meeting I had? Like if I want to schedule another meeting, maybe I want to know what the latest meeting was. Maybe in the future, I want to set up an automation so that, if it's been 3 months since I had a meeting, I want Airtable to email me and let me know that I'm due to schedule another meeting with him, something like that. The first step would be to know what was the date of the latest meeting. And in Airtable, it's very easy to do that. We can do that with a formula type, or a field type called a rollup. So let's say latest meeting. And we're going to make this a rollup field type. And so for a rollup, we choose the field that we're linked to, that we want to roll up information from. So in this case, it's the meetings table. And then we're going to choose the field that we want to roll up. In this case, that would be the date. So we're looking in the meetings table at the meetings that are associated with Danny and looking at the dates. And so Airtable is going to collect all of those dates. And then we will use a formula to say what we want to do with those dates. So in this case, I want to know the latest date. And so I'm going to use this function called max. And so we're taking the max, or the highest amount, which in date terms is the latest. And then the word values here represents all those dates that Airtable collected for us. So if I hit create field here, then it's going to give me the latest date. And if I look at these, let's see, 8/16, 8/13, 8/17. So 8/17 is the latest date, and it's going to give us that right there. Let's see here, I am going to add a couple. Okay, so let's do a couple other examples in meetings. So in meetings, maybe I have a view of meetings and I want to, first of all, I want to make a calendar view of these meetings. So I'm going to click down here is where we can create new views. And I guess I should back up for a second and talk a little bit about views. So another thing that makes Airtable very different from a spreadsheet is that we have our data that we're looking at here, but we're always looking at the data through a specific view, which is almost like looking at it through a lens. And that's very helpful because maybe sometimes we don't want to see all the meetings. Maybe we want to just see the meetings that were at a particular location, for example. So if I wanted to do that, I can go ahead and create a new grid view here. So let's say coffee shop meetings. I create that, and then I can filter it and add a condition where the location is coffee shop. And then it's going to show me just the meetings that were held at the coffee shop. But this is just a view, meaning I haven't changed the data at all. If I go back to my first view, the grid view, I can see that everything's still there. But if I click this one, which is always going to be there unless I delete it, then I've always got this pre-saved view that shows me just the coffee shops. And one thing that can sometimes be confusing when you first start using it is that if you make a change here, like if I change this to office here, it changes it in all the views. Making a change to a record is always applied to everything. So I do this, actually going to disappear from this view because it's no longer at a coffee shop. But if I go here, then that was one of these. I don't remember which one. And now it's office. Okay, we do have one question, which is, what is Rollup's general function? What could it do for information besides dates, for instance? Okay, that's a great question. And let me give you another example. So we're now in the meetings table. And one thing that might be useful if we're looking at a list of meetings is to know information about the clients that we're going to meet with. So let's say we want their email address. I can go ahead and create a roll up here. So let's say client email addresses. And we'll create a roll up of the clients. And so this is looking at the clients table. And then I'm going to choose their email address. And in this case, we'll leave the suggested one here, which is array unique. And that's meaning that it's going to just show us all the unique values, meaning that for some reason, if there were multiples of the same email address, it wouldn't show that. It's just going to show every unique email address. So if I go ahead and create this, now I can see all the email addresses associated with the people who are attending the meeting. And that might be useful when we move on to what I was about to do, which is create, in addition to creating grid views, we can also create calendar views, gallery, Kanban, timeline, lots of different views. I don't think we have time today to go through all of these, but I'm going to go ahead and create a calendar because I think that's pretty relevant to these meetings. And so when I create a calendar, I'm going to choose the date field, which is going to make the visual. So in this case, there's only one date field, so it's pretty obvious. But in some spreadsheets, you might track multiple dates. And so you want to pick the one that's actually going to be used in the calendar. And so if I click done, I can now see all of my different meetings. And if I click on them, I can see details about them and I can customize what details are shown. So for example, if I want to see those email addresses in the roll-up that we just created, I could go and customize the labels and surface that. And now when I look in here, then I can see the email addresses. I guess that one doesn't have any, but this one's got those. We can also color, like in a calendar view, we can color these in different ways. So maybe I want to color these based on the location. And so now I can see, all the ones that at the restaurant are green and the ones at the coffee shop are blue, something like that. That can also be useful. One other thing is, just like in the other views, when you make changes to data here, it gets changed everywhere. So for example, we've got this one that's on August 1st, 2023 at a coffee shop. I can drag this over to August 3rd. And now it's on August 3rd. And if I go into my grid view here, you can see the date is August 3rd. So I think that I will stop there for the minute and ask if you have any questions before I actually go back to my presentation.
So we do have a question, but I think probably will wait, but it's about exporting. So if you're going to be talking about that later, but I just want you to know that there's a question about formats that you can export a base into.
Okay. I think now is a good time for that. So just how can you export the information?
The actual question is, what formats can you export a base into?
Okay. So you can export it as a CSV. So if I click in the grid view here, I can download a CSV of the data. And so that would be able to be opened in an Excel spreadsheet or in Google Docs, something like that. Obviously, you won't preserve the relationships because Excel doesn't do those, but it would list, these as text.
I think maybe perhaps addressing that you can also embed Airtables into websites, so I don't know if the question limits that, but I think it's important to note that you can't use the Airtable in multiple ways, and like we have on our website, or so are there other ways that maybe that you can use the information in a base?
Absolutely, yeah, and Airtable has what's called an API, meaning that you can connect it with other online services. So for example, there are integrations that you can make with Google Docs, with Salesforce, with many of today's largest platforms where you might have accounts. And so rather than having to export information and import it somewhere else, you can actually set up direct integrations where the information flows directly to those other services.
A
So
question that I was
go ahead.
going to try. I'm trying to, I think I've actually started a couple bases in Airtable and I start putting data in, and I think my brain is still working to catch up with relational databases. So it gets stuck on trying to put everything in one table. And I see when you did it here, it was great, your example where you started with just the names, whereas like I did a database that had the names, all in the thing with the meetings to start with. Do you have any suggestions for a beginner trying to get used to relational databases to begin getting your brain trained on it? Is it just watching a lot of examples till it kind of catches, or is there other ways to simplify the thinking?
That's a great question. I think some of it is getting used to it. I do have a video that is kind of tailored towards that I can share Shelly afterwards. Or maybe I can find it real quick and drop it in the chat, because I think that would be helpful in kind of answering your question. If you're here watching. Okay, so I'm going to drop this in the chat here. But in general, just to also try to answer your question now, things that typically you might, if you're used to a spreadsheet, be used to using it, putting in different tabs, would be like maybe you have a different sheet for each month. And that's something that I would almost always in an Airtable base would put all months in the same table, because we can create views for dates. So for example, like if you want to track things and only look at the meetings from January, the meetings from February, rather than making different tables for each of those months, you would make different views for each of those months. And that decreases the amount of work that you have to do, because you don't have to create a new table every time there's a new month. You can just continue to work the way you wanted, but it also gives you much more flexibility, because you can have a view that looks at the whole year's worth if you want to, but then you can also just look at 1 month's worth. Hopefully that is somewhat helpful. The other thing that I will call out, because I think this is very useful, is so over here we have this sidebar that's called extensions. And extensions are like mini apps that we can add to an Airtable base. And so there is one extension that I like to use a lot that helps me look at the relationships in my database. And so that is called the base schema app. So if I create one of these right now, I'm going to hit add extension. It comes up with these little icons representing each table and then the relationships between them. And if I click this little gear here, I can see that it's showing not just those linked record relationships, but also formulas, roll-ups, lookups. And typically what I'll do is I'll toggle all of these off except for the linked record relationships. And now I can see I've got clients, I've got meetings, and that's the only relationship I have right now. But if I were to keep going with my example, I would link the clients to the dogs as well. So hopefully that answers your question a bit.
Yeah, it's really helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. And I'm going to move on because there is a couple of things I really want to make sure we cover before the end of the hour here. So I'm going to stop sharing this. And okay, this time I'm just going to share my my desktop, and that way I can pull the Airtable back in. And I'm not going to put it in presentation mode because I'm having issues with that. So one thing that I wanted to talk about is we have here's a picture of an Airtable base. So this is what we were just looking at. You can see up at the top here, we've got these three little tabs. One is data, one is automations, and one is interfaces. And so what we've talked about so far for this whole time has really all been data. And that's really actually where Airtable as a tool started. It used to be just data. When I started using it, we didn't have automations and we didn't have interfaces. But they've added these other tools that actually make Airtable really into more of not just a database, but this is actually something that you can create real software with. It's actually basically you can be a software developer. And I don't start with that because it's a very overwhelming thing to think about. And that's one of the things that's great about spreadsheets is just we don't have to think about this overwhelming thing like I'm going to build an app. You have some information you want to track, you put it in a spreadsheet. But once you start tracking information and you become comfortable with that, sometimes you want to visualize it in other ways and share it with people in more limited ways because they might only want to see a piece of it, or you don't want them to have access to certain pieces. And that's where you can actually really start to use the power of Airtable as being able to create full apps. And so remember these three things here, because the next slide I'm going to show you is from, this is not from Airtable. This is from actually a website builder called Webflow. But they, when they're talking about their services, they look at the same framework. There's these three kind of pillars that are how you build software. You have data, you have a user interface, so that's your graphic interface. And if you think about anything on the web, right, you have a way that you're interacting with it. You don't normally see the database. You see some buttons to click and some fields to enter data into, or data that's being shown to you. And then, of course, there's the logic. So there's the logic of like what happens in between that graphic interface and the database. So we think of like an example of, let's say, Netflix. Netflix has this very pretty UI that's showing you all the different movies you could watch. And on the back end, it's got a database of all of the different movies. And then the logic in between is determining what, it's predicting what it thinks that you want to watch next. So in Airtable, we can do that. And we can create those UIs and we can use automations to build in some of that logic. But it is just so much faster than having to do that with code, which is the traditional way to do it. And so that's a really cool thing about it. And so if we go back then to our base example here, I'm going to build a quick little interface. One thing I want to note is for automations, because a lot of this stuff is like, how can we give you kind of some ideas of things that you could do? Because you could do anything with this. And so I'm not going to go into automations because I don't think we have time, but I think I gave an example at the beginning of, let's say you want to get a reminder for yourself if it's been at least 3 months since you had a meeting with a particular client. That's an example of something you could set up an automation for. And so you'd go to automations here and you would add a trigger that says, okay, when it's been 3 months, you might have to have a formula field that flags when it's been 3 months since the latest meeting. And then you would have a trigger where Airtable looks at that and says, okay, now I need to take action. And then you could add an action, which shoots off an email. They also have a Slack integration, so it can send a Slack message. There's lots of different ways that you can do this. And when I say send an email, you can have Airtable send an email, but you can also integrate it with Gmail or with Outlook and have it actually send an email on your behalf. So from your email address, which is pretty cool. But we're going to build an interface real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and start build an interface. And let's say this is our like client dashboard. Oops. Next here. And then I've got all these different page layouts that I can use. In this case, I'm going to use one called record review. So next here, and the table is going to be the client's table. Next. And then it's going to let me pick some fields that I can start with. Yeah, I want most of them, so I'll leave them all in here. Next. And then let's just call this page clients. And I know I'm going super fast. I'm just trying to give you an idea of what's possible. And then if you want to know more, then we can talk about how to slow it down and talk about some of these things more in detail. But now I've got this cool little interface where I can click on different people, and Airtable's pretty smart, so it already gave me a little thumbnail for each one here. And on this side, I can now customize this. So maybe I want to make this a little more dense. So let's go ahead and actually I don't need name because I've already got first and last. So let's put first and last here. Email and birthday. And the picture, make it hero or carousel. Let's make it the hero type. And now if I hit publish, it's going to show me, what this looks like and prompt me, do I want to share this with other people? So I'm going to say not now, but I could share this with other people. Now we've got this nice view where I can see each person and some basic information about them. And if I go back in here, the last thing that I'll do here is we can actually we can add in our meetings. So let's add the meetings here. And I want to show this as a view. And we'll make it a grid view. And I guess we haven't had any meetings with Trent Krim yet. But if I go to Danny Rojas, I can now see him. I can also see all the meetings I've had with him. So this is really powerful. We can build this whole custom layout and then have just a very easy way to interact with data. Or maybe if we have team members who are not as versed in Airtable, we can build a very streamlined workflow just for them to do a specific task. So that is the end of my scheduled presentation, and we have just a couple minutes left. So I want to leave time to make sure we can talk about anything or I can answer any questions.
I love this interface. This is exactly what I'm trying to get our finance department to do with reimbursement requests. They could have the receipts right there on their screen and click, 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 and it all gets taken care of. But let's see, looks like we might have a question in Q&A. So Carlton is asking, how is Airtable priced and do they have nonprofit pricing? So we don't need an expert for that. They do have nonprofit pricing. There is a great free. I used Airtable many months before I had to upgrade. It's really an upgrade for limits on how much you can have in the database, like 1,000 records, I think. So yes, they do have a nonprofit pricing. I believe it's half the price of the traditional cost.
That's
So I
great.
think it's 150 a year, I think. And if you have people, you add people to your database, you get $10 credit for everyone that goes and signs up for an account. So I've cut our cost quite a bit by doing that.
That's great. Yeah, and so I think that the conventional pricing, if you're not a nonprofit, is I think it's $20 a month for the first paid plan, which is called the team plan. And then the business plan, where you get more features, is $45 a month. But you're totally right. And like even in the main workspace that I work in, I use the team plan, the cheaper paid one. And there are specific reasons why, very good reasons why you could, many people use the business plan, but you can do quite a lot with the team plan or even with the free one. I will just note that the billing is per person. So say it's $20 per month, or if it's half price for a nonprofit, $10, it's $10 per person, and specifically per person who has edit access. So you can add people as read only, and as long as they can't edit the data, they're free. But when they can edit the data, then they will cost. Okay, we're looking at half is $12 in the comments, and that may also be if you toggle the annual versus monthly. I don't know if you have that on, so it may be that the monthly is 12, but if you did it annual, it would be cheaper.
Yeah. And so yes, so if budget is an issue, there are ways to, like, I have some databases that other people need to get into that are in my free plan. And then I have others, so there's ways to work around paying for each person that has edit access.
Yeah,
Something
I
to think
found
about.
that to be one of the most, like Airtable is really great, but the per person thing can be somewhat problematic if you need other people to get into your database. So
Absolutely, yeah. There are certain, and one thing that I'll mention actually is forms, because someone mentioned forms earlier. One way to get people to get information into your database without paying for them is by using forms. But yes, they are very much a for-profit business, and there's a reason why the forms don't do everything that you want, because they want you to pay first.
See. Not seeing any other questions yet, but I'm sure they're out there. One thing I would like to know as you think about this session, if you would like to have continuing sessions on Airtable, please let me know. That is something that we certainly have already considered, but I want to make sure that the community would like that.
I'm just going to put my screen back up again, so that if you want to talk more about anything, feel free to contact me. So that's my website and my email address. But also, yeah, it would love to do more sessions like this if there's interest.
And one thing I believe that you do, Julian, is if people are having trouble building the database, I believe you also do consulting to help them to get the database how they want it set up. So
That's right. Yep. And there's two main formats of the consulting that I do. One is what I call coaching, which is you can book sessions, and it's very easy to just you can do as few or as many as you want, where you can ask specific questions and I'll help you basically be more empowered to do it yourself, but to get through sticky problems. And then the other one is like a full service build, where I build, like a database for someone.
it's looking like we're getting lots of votes for more sessions. So we may be reaching out and seeing if you would be interested in doing so. Awesome. Lots of people saying that this was really helpful. I know that several people that had to go to other meetings mentioned that they'd already learned a lot. All right, we have a few seconds left. Last chance for a question. All right. Well, thank you so much, Julian, for being with us today. I know that I learned something, and have several notes that I'm going to be using some features that I had not been using previously, particularly in the roll-ups. So I hope that it was as helpful to everyone that came as it was for me. And thank you all for joining us. I'm going to turn the recording off. If anyone has a question, I will still be here for a few minutes.
It's very nice to be with you.